Welcome in, everybody, to week number 2 of Northeast Indiana High School football. My name is Jeff Mahoney with Summit City Sports, and as always, we have Casey O'Boyle, the sideline Swami from GameNight. And Casey, what an exciting first week of football we had here in the Summit City.
It was fantastic, Jeff. I mean, wow, some of the games we had upsets, we had great finishes. I thought the game that you and Joe did out at Chambers was just fantastic. Literally one of the best finishes I've ever seen. I called it an Alcoa can't wait moment for old geezers like myself. Takes you back to the 70s and 80s where, you know, the NFL used to have their Alcoa can't wait commercials talking about the fantastic finishes. And I can still hear that theme song in the back of my head. And that's what was going through my mind watching that game last week. It was just bananas. And the kick by Nick Talamentes will go down in Snider lore. I mean, it was a special play. And then the just the back and forth, how that game finished, both sides, guys making big plays. What a finish. We'll talk more about that when we talk about those two teams and their respective games tonight. But yeah, week 1 was a special week. And I think week 2 is going to shape up the same way. We're going to feel a little bit better about all these teams and where they stack up after 2 weeks of action.
Well, let's start right there with Carroll traveling to Snider to take on the Panthers. Snider going to look for a little bit of revenge in this game after the 30-point loss to Carroll a year ago. Tyrese Brown was fantastic. The senior running back ran for 291 yards on 25 carries, along of 57. He had those 3 touchdowns. Would have been 4 touchdowns if it wasn't for that spectacular play by Tay Johnson, where he stripped the ball and recovered it at the 3-yard line. But his 291 yards rushing was 9 yards away from a Snider record that was set by John Nelson in 2011 against Bishop Dwenger. So they're going to take on a Carroll team. And for Carroll, it was a lot of the same. Jeff Becker piling up the statistics. 210 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, did have 2 interceptions. They also ran for 104 yards on just 11 carries, averaging 9.5 yards per carry with a touchdown. So Jeff Becker was his normal self, but it wasn't enough. They took a 1-point lead into halftime, but ended up losing the game 38-31 against Bishop Luers. So what do you see happening over at Spooler tonight when the 2 kind of old Snider coaches, if you will, both of them under Russ Isaacs, Doug Dinan, now over at Carroll, and Kurt Tittman continuing that legacy at Snider?
Yeah, there's a lot of those interesting intertwined coaching subplots this week, if you will, with all the different matchups. I mean, that's one of the reasons why some of our highlight games were Carroll at Snider, Northside at Dwenger, Northrop at Southside. There's a lot of those intriguing subplots at play that we can talk about as we move through each game. Of course, Coach Dinan, it's been well documented, was an assistant coach under Russ Isaacs for many, many years at Snider. And it's no secret that he and Coach Tittman, Coach Kurt Tittman, Snider's current coach, were the 2 guys kind of vying for that spot, the coveted spot when Coach Ike, decided to retire. And the Snider brass chose Coach Tittman, and Carroll vacancy opened up, and Coach Dinan was fortunate to end up over at Carroll. And I think both those guys have great programs, and they're both really happy where they're at. But there definitely is some history here. They know each other. I think they know each other's tendencies as well, as far as how they operate. So that always makes for an interesting subplot. Last year's 30-point win. I don't know if that means a whole lot this year. I really expected Snider to maybe beat Northside a little bit more than they did. And, for all practical purposes, that was a whisker away from losing that game. And they lost by 30 points last year to Northside as well. So I think you can throw last year totally out in the trash. And these are 2 different teams with 2 different missions. And I expect this one to be a fun game. It'll just be interesting to see how the weather plays out and if there's any personnel changes. And but yeah, I'm excited to see what happens here. I'd like to see Carroll run the ball a little bit more try to shorten the game a little bit. I think if the Chargers would have done more of that last week against Luers, they might have been able to survive that aerial show by Carson Clark. But, again, running the ball, successfully on first and second down against Snider's defense isn't the easiest thing to do necessarily. But I think for Carroll to win, that's clearly something they'll have to do tonight.
Looking at the game night page here for Snider, you got senior spotlight Carter Wortman and DJ Moore, who's committed to Indiana. They kind of do that strong side where they'll move from the right to the left to anchor that offensive line. And Tyrese Brown does such a good job of reading the blocks, and they don't always have to go to the strong side. So it makes it incredibly tough on opposing defenses to stop this run game. Well, at least that's what it showed in week number 1. And as Kurt Tittman said, that's what they want to do. They want to kind of smash you in the mouth and play that smash mouth type football at Snider year in, year out. Thought Luke Hopper did a great job of distributing the ball, 16 of 19 for 131 yards and a touchdown. He is a very athletic quarterback as well. Had a 2-point conversion, I believe it was, in that game. So did a really a great job of kind of just handling the offense.
Yeah, and he does a nice job mixing in his receivers and his tight ends. I mean, their play calls are, somewhat pedestrian, but it's safe. That's why he was very efficient. I thought Luke had a really nice opener. Lincoln Ferks, big tight end, is another St. Charles kid that decided to go to Snider, is a really good seam target. Cadrell Billingsley and Kamari Juarez are both really good receivers that I don't think get enough credit because Snider doesn't throw it a ton, but very, very capable guys, sure-handed. They both had nice games last week. And that little bit of passing game, Jeff, kept Northside's defense just off balance enough. And it allowed Tyrese Brown to have that monster game. We wrote in Game Night last week, or the Swami did, that he was going to explode. And he did explode. Like you said, 291, just shy of John Nelson's monster game a decade ago. It's funny, I asked Coach Tittman midweek if that was a record. He couldn't tell me off the top of his head at first. And I suggested to him in a text, I said, well, I think it's either John Nelson or Barrington Scott. Bear Scott had a huge game too. I feel like he had like 38 or 40 carries one year against Bishop Dwenger when Coach Ike was there. So I wasn't too far off. Maybe I'm not losing my memory quite as much as I think. I don't know what I had for breakfast, a couple hours ago, but maybe I remember some of this, meaningless minutia in the high school football world.
And the defensive front seven certainly picked up where a lot of people thought they would, being one of the strongest in the SAC. A really good game there from Nick Talamontes, who you said earlier kicked the 47-yard game-winning field goal with 1 second on the clock. Rohrbacher and Moon make up the linebackers. Markel Keel off the corner, and of course the big defensive tackle and Caden Hurst. It's going to be tough to run against this team, but if anybody can do it, it'd be Jeff Becker, who obviously poses the threat of running and passing.
Yeah, again, we've heard this week, you and I talked about it before. We're not sure if even Jeff Becker's going to play tonight. I've heard from several people that he may not be able to play, might be in quarantine. If so, that's a huge story, I think, going into this game. That being said, Owen Shealy is the backup, the junior quarterback. I think he's very, very capable if he is the guy tonight. Sometimes you just got to go with the goers, and there's injuries, and in the state of COVID with quarantines, this is going to be an ongoing thing for probably the rest of the season. Teams are going to have to adapt on the fly. And regardless of who's the signal caller tonight, as I mentioned earlier, Jeff, I think Carroll needs to run the ball to try to shorten the game a little bit. They got to load up that box too on defense and force Mr. Hoppert to beat them through the air. And if Tyrese Brown has another monster game, it's lights out, I think, for the Carroll Chargers. But that being said, Carroll always seems to play Snider tough these last few years in this matchup. So I expect this to be a very competitive game. We said 20 points in game night. That may truthfully be a little too high of a spread. We'll find out tonight. But again, I think a really, really fun competitive game out at Spuller Stadium. The fact that they've got turf out there, I think will really help both teams. It may help Carroll a little bit more with guys like Jamison Coverstone and AJ Lazoff in the passing game.
Yeah, and looking at Carroll, a strong performance from Coverstone, like you were alluding to, and especially before the season started, he'd be the top target. He had 130 yards receiving, and defensively, they were led by Ethan Beaupre, who had 7 tackles. Jorge Valdez had 8 to lead the team. 4 tackles for a loss for this defense. Liam Ottenweller is a 3-year starter, 5 tackles and a tackle for loss. And then Alex Smith with a sack there. So it will be interesting. Going to be a big day for Dylan Bennett, man in the middle there, trying to stop that rushing attack.
Yeah, and Aaron Stewart also had 8 tackles at corner. Anytime your 2 corners and your free safety lead you in tackles, it's not a good sign. Now, some of that is because of scheme with what Luers wanted to do, 38 attempts, 25 completions, a lot of balls downfield. But some of those tackles were coming up on Sir Hale, the talented running back out of Bishop Luers. And you never want your 3 secondary guys to lead you in total tackles. And that's what happened last week for Carroll. So I'd like to see them get a little more creative defensively, mix up some blitz packages, see if they can't, flip field position, get some down and distance situations in their favor in this game. I think that's the recipe for them. They can't play back on their heels and allow Snider just to march down the field with Tyrese Brown dictating things between the tackles.
Heading over to Bishop Dwenger, where Northside will come in looking for their first win of the season after that loss to Snider. The Saints handling business at Wayne, another team win for Bishop Dwenger. It's one of the things I really love about that program. They get everybody involved. It seems like if you're suiting up on Friday, you're going to get in the game and make some kind of contribution. But for Northside, the question was, who replaces Deuce Taylor? Brashawn Bassett was outstanding in that game. 14 of 18, 202 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jonte Lambert, we had a chance to talk to his brother, Hassan Lambert, after the game. Hassan said, no, he's going to be better than I was. Hassan, who set the record with 347 rushing yards against Northrop in that first sectional game last year. But Jonte was great, has a great burst, 17 attempts, 124 yards, 1 touchdown. And looking at Bronte Johnson, who's the #1 ranked player in the state, and it showed to be a sophomore and to do the things that he was doing in that game. I have no doubt that he is probably the single most, I don't want to say important player in the SAC, but he's probably the most gifted, most talented, and just a sophomore. And we saw that 2 years ago from Jeff Becker as a sophomore, where he just came in and showed that he could play with the big boys. Going over to Bishop Dwenger, Evan Springer, who transferred in, big, strong quarterback. I mean, it takes a lot to bring him down. Very efficient, 8 of 13 passing for 86 yards. So coach wasn't asking him to do too much there. And obviously KJ Tittman, 17 attempts for 110 yards, just bowling over defenders. He's a big, strong running back. So a lot of weapons over there at Bishop Dwenger. And once again, this has always been a game of talent versus depth. At least that's exactly what it was last year. Bishop Dwenger winning both meetings against Northside. How you like this matchup over there at Shields Field?
I love this matchup. I mean, again, we've heard different things about personnel issues. A couple days ago, I had heard, or yesterday, in fact, I'd heard that. No, 2 days ago. Excuse me, I'm losing track of my time. Wednesday, I heard that Tay Johnson was potentially going to be out. I did hear back from Coach Johnson, and he confirmed that that was false. That Bronte Johnson should play or will play in tonight's game. I think that's good news for the Legends. I thought last week he was the best player on the field. And to say that about a sophomore, as you mentioned, is saying something in this conference. He was fantastic on both sides. He had some cramping issues, which I think hurt the Legends, because it seemed like, especially when he was off the field defensively, Snider got some of those big gainers in both the rushing and the passing game. he was a difference maker. There was that one play where he literally almost caught Tyrese Brown from behind late in the context, where he like parted the Red Sea and he grabbed two of his teammates by their shoulder pads to move them out of the way. I don't know if I've ever seen that, let alone by a sophomore. He's got a different gear and closing speed that I don't think we've seen in quite some time. He's a special talent. He had 2 strips last week, 2 forced fumbles, one of which he recovered. You already mentioned in that Snider game where Brown was going in for a touchdown. He made some, and then the 98-yard kickoff return. My goodness, that right there, 17 points, and Snider wins by 2. I think we set our spread at 18, if I remember correctly. We probably weren't too far off in game night. But credit Northside for hanging around and doing all the things they needed to do to keep it in the game. But Bronte Johnson was a big reason for that. But Brayshawn Bassett, the quarterback filling in for Deuce Taylor, hats off to him. We featured him on the Northside page this week. He had a really nice game. I think he had some scramble plays. One in particular comes to mind where he found Rodney Woods over the middle. That was a huge play. The touchdown early in the game kind of set the tone. I probably gave him a lot of confidence. And I think they're going to be just fine in that regard. As long as they're able to keep running the ball successfully, they're going to be a tough out. On the other side of the ball, Bishop Dwenger wasn't real pretty last week. And to your point, Jeff, they played a lot of guys and did a lot of different things. That's kind of been the recipe for Coach Garrett over there. And I totally agree with you. It's get guys on the field, get reps. You know, that's how he's building this program. They do it from the freshman level onward. And you get a lot of guys buying in that way. And then when these games come down to the fourth quarter, many times that depth and that willingness to play for your teammates kind of comes into play, I think. And the Saints oftentimes get the benefit of the doubt in that regard, just because of, you know, all those kids being part of that program. They've got a record number of kids. I don't know. I feel like it's like 165 kids in 4 classes. Unbelievable numbers out at Bishop Dwenger, and it really shows. So you mentioned Evan Springer, the senior quarterback. I thought for his first start was pretty efficient. At some point, they're going to have to, I think, stretch the field vertically. And I like what Brody Dixon, the offensive coordinator, did at Dwenger last week with really safe pass plays to kind of protect his first-year starter behind center. And I think as this season moves on, they have some playmakers, you know, guys like, you know, Rocco Sioka and Henry O'Keefe, who were featured on tonight's cover. You got Carter Minix in the mix, no pun intended, a sophomore, very talented player. They tried to get him untracked early in the game last week and just couldn't connect, but there's plenty of weapons there, I think, on the offensive side of the ball. It'll come back to can they move that big defensive line from Northside, and can they run the ball with some success tonight? That's the big question. KJ Tittman's a great option, but you know, he's going to have some scenes. He doesn't make guys miss as much as I'd like to see him. He's more of a north-south guy. He likes to run people over, and that can take its toll, Jeff, as you know. And in past years, it seems like Coach Garrett had a lot of running back by committee. There were a lot of guys that got carries last week, but most of them were well after the game was in hand. So it looks to be KJ Tittman as the workhorse right now, and then guys like Teddy Steele, the Till kid, and there's a couple other kids that got some carries last week that could also be in the mix. But I think Teddy Steele could be a really nice secondary option. He's got a little bit more, make you miss in his ball carrying abilities compared to KJ Tittman. So that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But again, a really interesting matchup. I heard that the Saints might be missing a few starters on the defensive side of the ball. If indeed that's true, that could hurt their chances, especially against this passing game. But I think Colin Vance, the senior safety, is supposed to be back in the lineup. That'll be a big pickup, I think, for Bishop Dwenger on the back end. He'll be at strong safety according to their depth chart, which will allow Adam Lee to go to free safety. And I think Adam Lee is an underappreciated defensive back in this conference. Really good high school football player who I expect will be spying Bronte Johnson, giving him a little extra attention over top. Then it'll just be a matter if the BD cornerbacks can guard the other guys, Rodney Woods and Jordan Turner. And don't forget Ryan Collins at tight end. He could pose a matchup problem at 6'3" against the BD linebackers. So it's going to be a fun game. Hopefully weather holds out. And again, I think playing on turf over at Shields Field probably helps out the Legends tonight.
Yeah, big game from Cole Carey and Gavin Groves. They combined for 25 tackles and 7.5 tackles for loss. We were just gushing over Gavin Groves in the preseason. He certainly showed that was worthy. Moving from defensive back to the linebacker position. Those two guys, they're going to have their hands full again this week. And with Northside and Bassett, he can do the RPO game, the run pass option. We saw it on the 2-point conversion. He can run through Snider's defensive line to convert first downs or get the 2-point conversion. So I got to imagine these two are going to have another big week this week.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We highlighted Cole Carey on the BD page this week. I thought he did a really nice job. He's moved around a lot lately, just filling in holes. So is Adam Lee, as I mentioned earlier. And I think he'll now settle back in at outside linebacker. Gavin Groves, you mentioned, he had a monster game. He's kind of been that outside linebacker spot that, again, under Coach Kolkman previously, now Coach Nepper on the defensive side, they would put a lot of emphasis on that outside linebacker spot, putting pressure on quarterbacks, getting in the backfield and wreaking havoc. You think of guys, certainly Hayden Ellinger and John Michael Fabini come to mind here in recent years. That's definitely who Gavin Groves is. They moved him from safety down to outside linebacker. He looks like he's added 10 to 15 pounds of muscle this year, and I think he's going to have a monster season. So another linebacker to keep an eye on, Mitchell Vogelweed. I think we mentioned him, and then Ben Simcox. I thought Ben did a nice job at middle linebacker, and I believe that was his first start last week as well. The senior, he had a blocked punt and filled the run, filled some gaps nicely. So those guys need to read their keys on the inside. And but I was really impressed last week, I think, with Northside's offense. You and I talked about it earlier in the week, Jeff, where I thought they did a nice job creating things with their passing game, whether it was downfield passes or little flare passes, little dump passes. I think Coach Johnson over there, Coach Davis, did a really nice job scheming against Snider's defense and manufacturing some big plays with that passing game. A lot of those came on third down as well. So, if they can do that against Bishop Dwenger tonight, they'll be in a prime position to pull off a win.
Next game we'd like to look at, Wayne is traveling to Bishop Luers. Wayne suffering a 43-27 loss there against the Saints, but Lamarian Nelson had a nice game for them, rushing for pull Nelson up. He had over 100 yards on just 26 carries, so 122 and a touchdown, averaging 4.7. We expected big things from Sean Collins, 5 carries, 7 yards. This could be the week that he burst out against Bishop Luers. And as far as the Knights go, Carson Clark picking up right where he left off, 346 yards passing, 4 TDs. Sir Hale was awesome, 26 carries, 156 yards and a touchdown. 2A Bishop Luers goes in and beats the 6A Carroll Chargers, basically saying we are a legit contender for the Summit Athletic Conference title, and I believe they will be. I could see them maybe running the slate outside of Snider and Bishop Dwenger.
And Homestead. And the only reason I say Homestead is I think they've got some things to figure out on the offensive side of the ball, Jeff, but I think Homestead's defense is going to be pretty good when it all shakes out this year, as they have been for several years. But getting back to this game, talking with Coach Lindsay this week, he thought Sir Hale and the offensive line were the MVPs and not Carson Clark. Clark had some gaudy numbers for sure. He did have the 1 interception, and there were probably 2 or 3 others that could have been picked off. And so, especially late in the game when they could have put the game on ice, and knowing Carson Clark the way I do, he would probably admit that himself. And so that's the good news for Bishop Luers, is that you can throw for 350 yards and still feel like there's more out there. But my goodness, they have some weapons. Brody Glenn was fantastic. There are a couple times it looked like Carroll had forgotten that he was on the field. He was so wide open, and he had a monster game to kickstart the season. I think 9 catches for 166 is what's floating in my head right now. He had a really nice effort. Jaden Hill, tight end, I thought they did a nice job with him, especially on short yardage situations. Antoine Lake, we know all about him. He's going to be fantastic. And then Nick Thompson, I wouldn't be surprised if we see him a little bit more on the offensive side as well. Braden McInturf at slot receiver. But again, we'd be remiss if we didn't, give kudos to Sir Hale, the senior running back. Really kept Carroll's defense off balance. I think that ability to run the ball consistently for Bishop Luers offense. I watched most of that game, and as the game unfolded, it looked to me that Luers was the better team, and it was that ability to run and pass effectively and equally that I thought set them apart from Carroll last week, where conversely Carroll they didn't look comfortable running the ball, and they didn't look like they wanted to run the ball as insistently as Bishop Luers did. So hats off to the Knights. Huge win going out to the 4-5 and pulling off the upset. I thought it was an upset anyways, because again, a 6A versus a 2A. But to your point, your original point, Luers definitely could run the table. They've got that much talent. I mean, certainly injuries and attrition and things like that will factor in, but they're going to be right there with the big boys, no doubt about it this year. On the other side, Wayne, a little sloppy. I think I counted 7 encroachment penalties in the first half alone. It was almost hard to watch. I know, talking to Coach Haydock this week, it was anguishing for him, and rightfully so. I don't even know if they were hard counts half the time, Jeff, but just watching that game, they gave 1 5-yard penalty after another. And against a ball control offense like Bishop Dwenger has, especially breaking in a new quarterback, it was a recipe for disaster because they just kept the Saints on the field long enough to finish off some drives. And so they're going to have to clean that up. And Coach Haydock also said that they were not conditioned well. And that really caught up. I think most coaches probably felt that going into last week, that there's more they could have done because there was a lot of cramping that we saw. But he said he'll fix that. He's excited about seeing where this team goes. I think they should be healthy and have everybody playing. Bishop Luers, same thing. They might have one player that might be out with a minor injury, but otherwise both teams are really, really healthy. And, these are 2 Southside proud programs that, Bishop Luers is coming off a huge win, emotional win out at Carroll, where all those festivities out in Charger Land were planned, and they kind of spoiled that party. And then you got Wayne that just really didn't play that well, but had some success late in the game. They had the long touchdown run by Sean Collins on the kickoff return. And then you mentioned Lamarian Nelson. He's a workhorse, a really hard running back who had a monster season a year ago on the JV landscape. So if they can get something cooking with their passing game tonight, whether it be some screens or some slant passes, and I think this is where Sean Collins comes in more, they could hang around for a while, because this, again, it's a proud program. They typically play Bishop Luers pretty close through these last few years, but this seems like a little different Luers team. This harkens back, I think, to the 2012 era with Jalen Smith. I mean, I think they're right on par with that group in terms of overall talent.
Well, Casey, the best way to stop Bishop Luers and Carson Clark is to keep him off the field. And Coach Haydock's got a recipe for that with that ground and pound game. So going to be an interesting one over at Bishop Luers. Swami has the prediction of Bishop Luers winning it. Swami, how many touchdowns did you have?
Well, 28, and having breakfast with my legion of Fort Wayne football followers this morning, they all thought that was pretty high. They may be onto something too, especially since we're not on artificial turf out at Luers Field, and we've already gotten some rain, and there's potentially more rain in the forecast tonight. So we'll see. That Swami could be totally off there, but I think Luers is that good, and I think Wayne's still figuring some things out. If they corrected some of their issues from a week ago, it could be a ball game. But I tell you what, Luers looked really, really good to me. And I think right now the disparity in overall talent and efficiency and effectiveness. We talked earlier in the week, Jeff, about Luers' postseason run to the state finals. Think about all those reps those kids got in terms of practice and games and everything else. There is so much inherent value for that. You have to, that's just like a whole nother preseason camp. Those kids got that last year. A lot of these other programs, like Wayne, did not. I think it really translates into the beginning of the following year, especially when the vast majority of guys are back. They only graduated a few starters. So I think that there's something to be said for that run and how it's quickly translating for Bishop Luers, even though they're a two-way school in a big school, conference like the SAC.
Yeah, Coach Lindsay is definitely doing a great job there at Bishop Luers. You saw it where Jackson McCullough was a sophomore starter for Snider last year, now over at Luers, and led them in tackles. So kids are starting to once again say, I want to play over at Luers to compete for state championships.
They've got some talent for sure. Some young guys. Aiden Dennis is another kid that came over from Huntington North. He made an impact play at defensive end last week. And they just, again, they've got a lot of parts. Now, do they have depth? That's questionable. Are they a couple key injuries away from, I think, going from an elite 2A team to maybe a good 2A team? Yeah, that's definitely could be factoring in. But if they stay healthy and they stay humble and hungry, this is a team I think that's destined for greatness. And I really like the mindset at our photo shoot. The kids, they were confident, but I never felt like they were overly cocky. They were respectful, but they had an air to them, a walk, a swagger that you could just tell. And you get that vibe like this is a group that's going to do special things this year. And we saw it last week, a really impressive win out at Carroll.
Well, Northrop's traveling over to Southside. And last week for Roosevelt Norfleet Jr., he had one big play, the 93-yard touchdown to CJ Davis. And then outside of that, Keone Bates did the rest of the signal calling for the Bruins. Minus 11 yards. I think I also saw where it was minus 19 yards rushing. That's a big difference from a year ago where they had the SAC's leading rusher in Demarius Cowan taking on a Southside team. I'll be honest with you, Quincy English, I was excited about him last year, and he made some neat looking plays. He's an electric player for the Archers, but they fell short in that one, 42-20, with those touchdowns coming late in the third quarter there for Southside. Can the Archers win this game against Northrop, or does Northrop get it put together this week?
It's hard to say. I mean, Southside was a tale of two halves last week. And they fell behind, I think it was 35-7 going into the break. And then they did some really good things after the break. And talking to Coach Tiny Lee, he was super pumped. He said they dominated the second half. It was a totally, complete 180 on behalf of the Archers. You mentioned Quincy English throwing the ball, but he actually ran the ball successfully. I think they've got to do a little bit more than just him on the offensive side of the ball. Jalen Lattimore, we featured this week. I think he needs to be factoring in more offensively, running the ball, trying to shorten the game a little bit and see if they can't get a lead and hang around long enough to believe. The sideline Swami affectionately referred to this game as the Rose Bowl. I'm sure you can appreciate that with Roosevelt Norfleet now over at Northrop, and his son, of course, also is going to share, I think, snaps with Bates. They might be a two-headed quarterback battle for a while out there. Talking to Coach Dorfler, he liked both these guys. He thinks they're both capable. The Bruins had two big TDs to kickstart things last week against Homestead. The one lengthy touchdown, the first one to CJ Davis, is a 92-yarder, is actually a school record, or 93 yards, excuse me. And so that was a pretty impressive play and a way to start the season. 7-0 against Homestead. And then, of course, they had another one to Dane Kilby, another lengthy touchdown pass. And so this is it's ironic that they want to throw the ball now, and we had them officially for negative 17 yards. And it's just, to me, again, you mentioned Demarius Cowan, who I believe is at a junior college down in Indianapolis. He had such a monster year, and we looked at last year's team and thought, man, if they could just throw it a little bit more and be a little bit better in the passing game, this running game could really make this offense so dynamic. Well, now it's the exact opposite 1 year later. It's just I think it just shows where Northrop is as a program, Jeff, and how these other programs, they have identities and they have feeder systems, and it all blends together, and they don't change much from year to year in terms of their DNA. Northrop has to change literally year to year based on their personnel packages. And I think Coach Dorfler's done a really good job kind of getting things turned around. But that's just where they're at right now as a program. But they could be missing a couple guys, a couple key guys I've heard. Defensively might change some things up. But I think Southside, again, has, the right recipe in terms of Quincy English at quarterback and Jalen Lattimore getting some more touches tonight. Whether or not they can hang with Northrop, I don't know. It remains to be seen. I just think Northrop probably wears them down after the break. And I think they've got more athletes, especially in that aerial attack. Jordan Schmink is another kid that we need to keep an eye on. I think that could produce some big numbers tonight for Northrop, as the Archers put a lot of emphasis on Davis and Kilby.
Yeah, Jelante Hinton, the sophomore defensive lineman over there at Northrop, with 2 tackles for a loss in that game for the Bruins. It should be a fun game over there at Southside. And once again, you got to like the enthusiasm that Coach Lee brings to the Archers.
Yeah, I do. Like I said last week, I really enjoyed him. I'd never met him before our photo shoot, and I love his passion. You can just hear it in his voice. He loves those kids, and I mean, he's just the kind of guy, I think, that's going to really, his personality will resonate with the kids out at Southside. They're going to want to really, break through a wall for the man. And I love his passion. Are they a little shorthanded in most of these matchups? I think in the SAC, probably. And again, depth is a huge concern. They're 1 or 2 key players away from really making things difficult. They've got to stay healthy. But Jalen Lattimore is just a really talented player. Trevor Hapner, another one. I think they got to find a way to get him more touches offensively. But they've got some speed, and they've got some ball players, and they got kids that want to compete. They're playing against their former coach and former teammate. That's, again, the Rose Bowl. So we'll see. It might be a fun one to keep an eye on tonight out at Southside.
Concordia is traveling over to Homestead. Both of these teams are 1-0 on the season, and Concordia found an answer at running back with Dontrell Johnson, who had a nice game for them, and them getting that win over there against Southside. Homestead, once again, another quarterback, Peyton Slavin, putting into the mix. He was 14 of 22 for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. I feel like it's just a matter of time before he's thrown for over 300 yards. Running back kind of by committee there. Cam Johnson led the team with 13, and Smith had 12 carries. Nate Anderson, 3 catches for 33 yards. So obviously Northrop was paying a lot of attention to Anderson, who did have a touchdown. Sparrow led them with 7 receptions for 79 yards. I thought Eli Maddox played a good game over there for Concordia, 12 of 23, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns and an INT. But once again, Johnson, you see 24 carries, averaging 4.1 per with 2 touchdowns. The person who definitely stood out in this game is James Rusher, the linebacker from Concordia. He was just all over the place. Fumble recoveries, had an interception, and Rusher also had 5 tackles and 1.5 tackles for loss in this game. I think this is an interesting game.
Yeah, it is. And it seems like these last few years, Jeff, Concordia, more times than not, has played Homestead really, really tough. And I thought last year, especially after Homestead got upset in week 1, albeit missing some key guys on defense, and Concordia returning all those players a year ago, especially their quarterback and running back on offense, and then everybody on that defense, that they were going to find a way to get it done last year. Homestead of course, as we know, ran the table and won 10 in a row. There's the score there from 2018. And they've had some really good battles. So this will be interesting for sure to see, what happens going into week 2. Can Concordia pass the ball with some success? The Johnson boys, I call them Johnson and Johnson, Don Trell and Robert, really good football players. Both those guys, I think, need to be involved heavily in the offense. Jace Parnan is another player who is kind of a Mr. Everything out there. He does, he's got his hands or feet kind of in about everything for the Cadets, and had a really nice game last week. A couple touchdowns, one in the passing game, one in the receiving game. And then you mentioned Eli Maddox. I thought he was pretty efficient, did some nice things, throwing the ball, a couple good balls downfield, a couple jump balls that were his athletes went up, made plays. And but this defense for Homestead, after they settled down last week, giving up those 2 lengthy touchdowns to the Bruins, I thought they looked really good. I think if somebody to keep an eye on is the strong safety Austin Keyser. I like him, really good athlete, deceptively good athlete. I think Isaac Barkus at free safety is another really good player. I think we'll see him more on the offensive side of the ball too as the season unfolds. Gage Sparrow, you mentioned offensively, had that big week, but obviously all that emphasis was put on Nate Anderson. He could have a breakout game tonight for sure against that Concordia secondary. But in the Homestead, I just like what they've done. There's a good shot of big Johnny Waddell. I think he's 6'6", 375. I mean, that's just a large human being. I love that picture. Leslie Palmer submitted that this week for us. And you got guys like him and then Matt Miller, who made our preseason top 40 team, right there plugging things up. It looks to me like a Homestead defense that has the makings of being pretty special by the end of the year. I do worry a little bit about Des Smith at corner. If he's going to be kind of the featured running back, that could he could wear out by the end of the year. So I wouldn't be surprised that maybe they keep trying to develop. You mentioned Cam Johnson, some of these other guys, a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball. So Des Smith can just be maybe more of a spot duty running back. I think that's probably part of their recipe going forward. But yeah, Homestead every year, I feel like we kind of doubt them. We look at their graduation losses and think, oh, well, they're going to take a step back. And every year they do such a good job out there. They have a tremendous coaching staff. I think Coach Skelton, in my opinion, is the best offensive coordinator in the area, along with Coach Stansky out at Luers. Those would be my top 2 guys right now. And I think they've got a great mix of assistant coaches who are dedicated and passionate. And they've got it going on right now. Peyton Slavin, he's a young quarterback, a junior. I thought did just enough, wasn't super flashy. And I think they did a nice job protecting him in terms of play calls. This Concordia game will be another, opportunity for him to, I think, take some steps forward in terms of evolving as a passer. And so I expect if the weather holds out, a little bit more passing tonight for the Homestead offense, trying to build Slavin's confidence moving forward. And again, I think it could be a huge night for Nate Anderson. I think I'm expecting a breakout night for him.
Yeah, I had to pull up Evan Ormsby's stats from last year.
They're ridiculous.
Once
they're
again,
ridiculous.
Concordia won or lost 7-0 in this meeting a year ago, and Eli Maddox was the starting quarterback in that game. But Ormsby started off slow. You see 119, 110, 91 yards, 168, and then pow. Nobody in the state was more prolific than Evan Ormsby from weeks 5 through 10. He was just outstanding. So you got to believe that sooner or later, this passing game is really going to uptick over at Homestead. You see here, he had 4 weeks in a row of 5 or more touchdowns.
Oh, I love that, Jeff, that you brought that up. What a great graphic. I mean, you are so right. He was just ridiculous. And again, I think this goes to my earlier point with Coach Skelton. I said he's a QB whisperer. I believe that. I think he is really good at developing quarterbacks out at Homestead. I mean, if you look through the years since he's been there, they've had some really, really good ones. Evan Ormsby was a defensive defensive end, I believe, and it hadn't played quarterback for a few years. And then all of a sudden, Luke Goody makes the decision not to play his senior year. Clearly, he'd been the guy. They plug in a defensive lineman, and he looks like a fish out of water the first few weeks of the season. And my goodness, like you showed there, week 5 on, just unbelievable. And that wasn't against chopped liver. There's some pretty good teams in there that they played and beat. And again, kudos to Coach Skelton, Coach Zolman, and the Homestead Spartans. They've done some really, really good things on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and these are just some stat lines that you do not see very often. 436 yards, 6 touchdowns against Carroll last year. Obviously, that's a rivalry game. Well, Casey,
ridiculous. Yeah, and look at all the touchdowns. It was unbelievable. Now, granted, some of those were, you got to give credit to all those great receivers and the offensive line giving him time. But my goodness, yeah, what they did last year is remarkable, and it does make you wonder if we're going to see the same thing this year with Peyton Slavin, or we're going to see that big uptick somewhere around week 4, week 5. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, I agree. Casey, Angola is traveling to Leo. This is usually a fun game. Leo Lions, I think they're better than what they were a year ago. That rushing attack is just absolutely filthy. As a team, they ran for 5 touchdowns, over 200 yards, over 5 yards a carry here, 29 attempts, 221 yards. Once again, not really passing the ball. They were 1 for 3 with Jackson Barber and Rylan Crawford in this game. Crawford did make that one catch for the 3 yards. But, man, Mason Sharon, this is a guy that was not playing for Leo last year. And I think that he's probably their top running back right now, even though Ethan Crawford went 2 carries for 27 yards, averaging 13.5. Sharon did lead them with 6 attempts. And that's one way to keep these running backs healthy when they spread it out so much. But Leo, you got to like them against Angola.
Yeah, no doubt. Carson Hepner, another kid, saw him this morning at breakfast, along with Caden Miller, who I think will be back in the mix soon. You've got Ethan Crawford, of course, Mason Sharon. They've got a stable of running backs. They love to run that T formation. I think they're going to throw the ball more. Talking to them at our preseason photo shoot, I sure got the feeling the Lions they're convinced that they need to do a little bit more in the passing game. And maybe last week they got out to such a big lead early on, 41-0 at halftime with relative ease against Woodland. They just thought, okay, we don't need to do it this week. We're going to save, a couple little treats for Santa and then see where it goes from there. But at some point you got to do it in games. You can't just sit back and then think, okay, we're going to save it week 4 or whatever against East Noble and or week 5, whenever they play the Knights. I think it's week 5. You got to go prep it and rep it in practice and in games. And I was shocked that they only threw 3 times last week. But by the same token, they just were so efficient in the running game and they didn't need it. They just jumped out to an enormous lead. But I like this Leo team. Like I said, I saw some of these guys this morning at breakfast, and they're a real confident bunch. They've got a real good vibe. The line, I think, with DJ Allen in the mix now with Landon Livingston, some big monsters there. They got a couple other guys that are very, very capable in the trenches. They got a freshman, Brock Schott, in there, 6'3", 185 at tight end. He did some good things, had a key block last week that Coach Sauter mentioned. And then, just a stable of running backs and linebackers, guys that can do things on both sides of the ball. Tanner Jackson is another kid at linebacker. It's really efficient. Drew Baker. I mean, they got a lot of really, really good football players. And this is going to be a tough game for Angola. But this Angola team, it's hard to figure out. They've got a new young quarterback. Tyler Call is his name. He's, I think, a deceptively good athlete and a pretty good passer. Jake Land, 6'3" receiver, the son of a former Northrop coach, Matt Land, I think is a really capable wideout for them. And then Michael Burleson at wide receiver had a big touchdown catch last week. in their comeback win over DeKalb 42-28. So this is an intriguing matchup for sure. I still think Leo is far superior, especially in the trenches, and they've got so much experience that I expect them to jump out to a big lead by halftime or early in the third quarter. Could be wrong. Again, this is another big spread that this morning at breakfast, there were some raised eyebrows at 28 points, but I just think Leo is that much better right now. Top to bottom, they're really good in all three facets, and I expect the Lions to control things with that ground game. I'm hoping they throw it 6 times tonight instead of 3 times. I just want to see that passing game slowly evolve, Jeff, because it's hard to be so one-dimensional. Yes, you talk about being built for November, being able to pound the ball and run the ball. That's great, all well and good. But they ended up getting nipped last year by East Noble in the sectional championship, in large part because they just could not pass the ball. And the Knights loaded up the box and said, you're going to have to beat us through the air, and they could not. And consequently, East Noble was able to avenge that regular season loss with a 10-0 victory in the sectional. And you look at those other scores against Northridge and Northwood, 2 really good football programs in the northern part of the state, but they were lucky to escape both of those. So I think, again, they're going to have to open things up a little bit more. I'm not their offensive coordinator, and I don't know all the inner workings of the program, but I can't help but think that we're going to see a little bit more offensively, and maybe tonight is a good opportunity to do that against a better opponent in the Angola Hornets.
Well, Casey, just real quick, let's rattle through the final 3 games. Eastbrook, a proud tradition there, going to New Haven. New Haven losing it in double overtime against Garrett. I know you had Garrett's head coach as your coach of the week. Central Noble heading to Woodland, and Adams Central at Eastside. That's a big matchup that everybody's loving this week.
Yeah, that's if it wasn't Northside and Dwenger, that would have been our game of the week. This is a great small school matchup, both state ranked. Adams Central is just loaded. They've got almost everybody back from a really good team from a year ago. Coach Michael Mosher has done a fantastic job with the Flying Jets, as his predecessors had. This is a team, I think, that I wouldn't be shocked if they go up to Butler and pull off I think it would be an upset. But this spread with the Swami started somewhere in the 13-14 range for Eastside and slowly worked its way back down to a field goal. And I think Laban Davis is one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks in the area, in large part because of guys like Carson Clark and Jeff Becker, who are just have had great seasons here recently. But Davis is pretty much a 4-year starter out at Eastside. And if he was playing for a bigger program here in the Fort Wayne metropolitan area, he'd be getting, I think, more headlines. He's a fantastic talent. He's just as good running the ball as he is passing it. They've got a lot of tough defensive players. Dax Holman at linebacker is one of those guys that I really like. Kyler Kibbe, the other linebacker, and Dakota Reed. All 3 of those guys love to lay the wood for Eastside. And then Adams Central, this is another team that doesn't pass the ball. I think Ryan Black, the junior quarterback, had 1 pass last week for a touchdown, but they just want to pound it. And they've got Alex Curry back. They got Blake Hirely back. I think he's been there since the Obama administration. You've got just guys everywhere. They're just loaded. And they've got speed guys too. Nick Neuenschwander had a really good game for them last week on both sides of the ball. Gavin Cook at safety made some nice plays. Josh Mosier, I believe is the coach's son, factors in at safety and at split end. So this is a team that's got a lot of parts, and they again, both programs, not a lot of depth because they're smaller schools, and 1 or 2 key injuries or cramping to a key player could totally change the outcome of tonight's game. Hopefully last week's cramping issues are behind us and these kids got the message, and the hydration was a little bit more of a focus all week long. But regardless, Jeff, I think this is going to be a really, really fun matchup. I can't wait to see how this one turns out. I wouldn't be surprised again if it came down to the 4th quarter and a special teams player too, or a key turnover late being the deciding factor.
Yeah, and then Eastbrook over at New Haven. Like I said, a tough loss for New Haven, and you had to award Garrett on that big win.
Yeah, and Coach Kyle Boer, I liked him again at our photo shoot. This is the first time I met him. I'm sure he was very disappointed in that loss. Hats off to the Garrett Railroaders after getting pummeled a year ago, 47-21 by the New Haven Bulldogs at home. They return the favor, go out to New Haven and pull off the upset. What a great win for Coach Depew and the Garrett Railroaders. I think caught everybody by surprise a week ago. Yeah, New Haven's got big players. They've got speed. Jakar Williams at quarterback. I mean, to me, he looks like a man amongst boys at time. Look at that. Isaac Carswell made our preseason top 40, and he did not disappoint. I don't know how it's possible to have 18 solo tackles, but whatever. God love him. If that's how they recorded it, that's fantastic. He's a heck of a linebacker, and I'm glad we put him on our PT 40. But yeah, they've got to finish drives. I think they need to throw the ball a little bit more on first down and be a little less predictable. But it'll be interesting to see how they respond against an Eastbrook program that's got a ton of pride and ton of tradition down in the Marion area. This is a tough tune-up going into the Northeast State Conference slate for New Haven. They do not want to start 0-2 and then get off to a bad start, and then you start worrying about confidence issues and guys pointing fingers, things of that nature. With a young first-year head coach, you want to make sure that you get off and get some success. And losing last week the way they did in overtime, 21-18 to Garrett, I'm sure left a foul taste in the mouths of the Bulldogs. So I expect them to play a much better game tonight with a little bit more passion. And I think last week they might have taken the Railroaders a little bit, underestimated them a little bit after pounding them last year rather. And then the other game, Central Noble at Woodland. I mean, Woodland lost a key player, Jackson Fleek, for the season. Very disappointing. Really sad to hear that. I know his family. This is a kid I think that was going to be a tremendous two-way starter for them, and big strong kid at tight end and defensive end. That hurts. Woodland just can't seem to catch a break. Coach Mike Smith, I like him a lot. They were not in that game at all last week. This is an important game for the Warriors. Central Noble, of course, coming off a 7-point win a week ago against West Noble. They're feeling really good about things. They've got a young coach there, Hayden Kilgore. You showed their schedule. This is another proud program locally with a young head coach. Both these teams are very similar. They kind of mirror one another. We've got Central Noble by 9 in GameNight. I think it's a fairly low-scoring game. I don't think either team really wants to pass it much. So I expect a pretty fast game, a lot of running between the tackles, a lot of moving clock. But it could be, like a 21-12 or something like that in favor of Central Noble.
Well, Casey, hopefully the rain stays away Friday night tonight for these big matchups. We will be out at Snider High School for the Carroll game. We've got coverage for North at Dwenger, Northrop at South, Concordia at Homestead, Angola at Leo, Eastbrook at New Haven, and of course the Central Noble at Woodland game. So we'll be busy tonight, and we hope all the fans can make it out. Casey, thank you for the preview on week number 2 and the wrap up of week number 1. Folks, my name's Jeff Mahoney, and once again, that's the Sideline Swami, Casey O'Boyle.